Morning, Catherine. Welcome to Adult Formation.
Morning. Thanks, Craig, for your quick response there.
Happy to help. Glad you can be with us.
Yeah.
Well, Mark, I think maybe we can get started. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone online and in the room. My name is Jay Clark, and I'll be hosting today's session with our speaker, Mark McInroy. We're looking forward. This is the second of 3 or 4 presentations to start our fall programs. And before we start, I'd like to start us all with a prayer. To the God of all, we give thanks for the gifts of your creation. And we know your presence with us and your inspiration for us to work to share your creation with all. We ask your help that we may see more. Amen.
Amen.
And with that, I'd like to first check in just one protocol issue, or that if the attendees in the room are comfortable, I'm told that we do not need to wear masks. So that's kind of, if anyone would like us to wear masks, though, that is perfectly fine. So is the room comfortable without masks, or? Okay, very good. And with that, I'd like to introduce Mark McInroy, who really doesn't need an introduction to Adult Forum or to St. John's. But Mark is going to be our speaker today and presenting our second session on decolonialization. So thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you, Jay. Greetings, everyone. Wonderful to be with you this morning. Very much looking forward to going through this material and these ideas, which I think will build off of what Dr. Judy Stack gave us last week, which was a really rich, just fantastic start in looking at the Genesis narrative and how that might challenge a colonial mindset, if we can put it that way. Welcome also to those joining us online. You will see, I hope, online participants, that there is a PDF document that's in the chat there. You can use that to navigate our talk. I'll be referring to a number of quotations from different figures during the course of our time, so feel free to consult that as we move through it. So I've titled this talk, Be Like the Land, Be Like God, the Cappadocians and Athanasius on the Distribution of Goods to the Poor. And as we get underway, I'd like to just do a quick recap of what we can think of as that colonial mindset. Again, Dr. Stack put this before us last week, and many aspects of colonialism were described. But the one that will be most important for us today concerns commodification. Commodification, so turning things into commodities, and in particular, turning land into a commodity, turning land into something from which resources, goods can be extracted. So with that in view, I think it's not a far step to say that hoarding goods and the avarice that might animate it come with colonialism. Not that that didn't happen before colonial efforts were underway, but perhaps colonization gives us an especially egregious form of that kind of hoarding of goods. And it's for this reason that I thought that turning to the Cappadocian Fathers could be illuminating. In particular, Basil of Caesarea, one of these 3 figures, his homily 6, which is also titled, I will tear down my barns. It's a line from the parable of the rich fool in Luke's gospel. And I'll just make a global comment before getting into some detail here. One of my interests in presenting these figures is to drive something of a wedge between Christianity and empire, right? So we have, for a number of months now, really, here at St. John's, talked about the ways in which those 2 things have perniciously gone together. So certain Christian ideas, purportedly Christian ideas, have been used in imperial efforts in colonization in particular. And what we find, I think, with the Cappadocians, and for those who don't know, these are 3 late 4th century theologians who are operating in modern day Turkey. So they're in an area known as Cappadocia. And it's Basil of Caesarea is one, we'll hear from him shortly. Gregory of Nazianzus is another. We'll hear from him later in the talk, and then someone from whom we won't hear at least today is Gregory of Nyssa. So these three are the Cappadocians. And they are establishment figures in the church. You can't get around just how central these figures are for the formulation of key Christian doctrines, key Christian ideas. So they're operating at a time when Christology is still very much up for debates. The Council of Nicaea has occurred in the early 4th century, but not everyone is on board with Nicene Christology. So Arianism, which would demote the Son, make the Son, Jesus Christ, not fully divine, is very much a force that's in play. These figures, the Cappadocians, are invading against those ways of thinking in various ways to solidify Nicene Christology. They are crucial for the development of pneumatology, the doctrine of the Holy Spirit, which affirms that the Spirit is indeed fully divine and belongs right up there with the Father and the Son. And they're instrumental in formulating Trinitarian theology. So they are key for comprehending how it could be that we have three persons in one God, not three gods, and not modalism, which is another kind of wrong turn as far as Orthodox Christian theology is concerned. We could get into the details, but they don't necessarily serve our purpose. My central point in bringing them up is simply to I hope, convey briefly just how very much these are figures who are at the heart of Orthodox Christianity. They are establishment figures through and through. And yet, as I will present to you all today, I would suggest that they deeply challenge what we could think of as an empire mindset, a colonial mindset. So they are very much figures in establishment Christianity, and that very much does not get along with any number of features of imperialism and of colonialism. So that, I think, presents us with some kind of big picture global considerations that we might do well to take forward, making sure we don't conflate those two things, Christianity to core and empire as a whole. One can draw distinctions between these things, as much as we've seen some other ways in which that story unfolds. One can't see daylight between those two things. So Basil's homily is on this parable of the rich fool, and you have that on your handout before you. And I'm wondering if I could get a volunteer to read that parable to us, since it will be so important for what we will be doing in the next few moments here. Anyone up for reading? Great, thank you, Judy.
Then he told them a parable. The land of a rich man produced abundantly, and he thought to himself, "What should I do? For I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, 'Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your life is being demanded of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be?' So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich towards God."
Okay, thank you very much. There's a lot we can say about this. Basil has quite a bit to say about it. Before getting too much into what Basil himself says, though, I want to highlight one point that's going to come back around. It's going to take us a little while to get there, but it connects quite closely to what Dr. Sack presented us with last time. We see at the very beginning of the parable, the land of a rich man produced abundantly. And that fact that it's the land that's doing this work is going to be integral to what Basil's going to put forward. So he uses this parable for his homily, and you could say that at the heart of the homily is a challenge to the propriety of superfluous property, right? Things that we don't need, to challenge this issue to that. And just a bit of context, this was a topic that was of some import to Basil. He was a bishop of a wealthy ecclesiastical see, and he saw it as important to form the immoral imagination of his listeners. So how does he do this? How does he go about forming that moral imagination, challenging even the views of his listeners? He starts by envisioning a bit more of a robust pushback from the rich fool, right? And so in the first quotation that you can see there on the handout, he imagines something that we can very easily imagine in our day, I think. And that is that this person would push back and say, but whom do I treat unjustly by keeping what is my own? To this, Basil responds as follows. Tell me, what is your own? What did you bring into this life? From where did you receive it? This is what the rich do. They seize common goods before others have the opportunity, then claim them as their own by right of preemption. For if we all took only what was necessary to satisfy our own needs, giving the rest to those who lack, no one would be rich, no one would be poor, and no one would be in need. So rich man says, look, this is mine. What's wrong with just keeping what's mine? There's a fundamental challenge to the very notion of ownership that Basil issues. Where has this come from? Is it you who has produced these things? The answer is, of course. The answer, of course, is no. This come from a larger source, the land, God, these kinds of things. Brian Matz is a New Testament or a patristic scholar who I think has a very helpful way of capturing what Basil was getting at here, right? So you can see there on the handout. It says, the person attached to property does not want to believe that anyone but himself or herself is responsible for his or her acquisition of property. Consequently, such a person could not imagine that his or her own ownership of property comes with a responsibility to others. So the rich fool, any number of other people, think that they own it. They can't imagine that anyone but himself is responsible for that ownership, having no appreciation for what has come before. And as a result, they don't see any responsibility toward others. Just a quick reference to some history that precedes Basil. There's actually a whole trajectory of patristic commentary on these issues, questions of ownership. And Irenaeus is another church father whom some of you might know. For Irenaeus, the possession of property was not a right that followed upon the expension of one's labor to acquire it. And that was because property is the result of someone else's earlier labor. So property could never really be considered private, according to Irenaeus, because no one person could ever claim to have produced it. So there's a whole backstory to any engagement with property, possible ownership of property. It's not simply the result of the efforts of the person who got there first, efforts that might have ensued after that point.
Water the grass before we go.
Appreciating that prior context.
Grass seed.
So then at this point, we're asking whose goods are they with this challenge to ownership?
Water the grass seed this morning.
But if this is represents something of a wrong turn in thinking about these issues, right? Thinking of one's own agency, one's own efforts in a rather exaggerated fashion. What's the alternate way of thinking? How else should we understand this? Basil makes a number of, to me, fascinating gestures toward the earth. And at a number of points that I'd like to highlight in the homily, he is calling upon his listener to imitate the earth. So there's nature imagery that gets connected with justice in homily 6. So just a few of these that I'd like to bring our attention to. So the very first one there on the handout, you can see those very words. Imitate the earth, O mortal. Bear fruit as it does. Do not show yourself inferior to inanimate soil. After all, the earth does not bear fruit for its own enjoyment, but for your own benefit. Even inanimate soil bears fruit for the benefit of others. Surely, folks, we can be better than dirt, right? So along very similar lines, a couple of other allusions to natural images and the earth. Like a mighty river that is divided into many streams in order to irrigate the fertile soil, so also are those who give their wealth to be divided up and distributed in the houses of the poverty-stricken. Wells become more productive if they are drained completely. While they silt up, they are left standing. Thus, wealth left idle is of no use to anyone, but put to use and exchanged, it becomes fruitful and beneficial to the public. There's a way in which things should be, the flowing of that river, the flowing of goods. And if things are dammed up, then they don't work right and they won't. So one more quotation, a couple of remarks, and then maybe I'll open things up for some comments from you if you would like to join in. So another gesture toward the earth. The earth was welcoming all to its richness. It germinated crops deep in the furrows, produced large clusters of grapes on the vine, made the olive tree bend under a vast quantity of fruit, and offered every delicious variety of the fruit tree. But the rich man was unwelcoming and unfruitful. The contrast there clearly drawn. The earth is just producing and producing and producing. The rich man runs counter to nature. There is an order. There's a way in which things should be, and the rich man impedes that order, runs against nature. It's a scathing commentary on what the rich do. They are unnatural. I know I've been at it for a little while here and thrown a lot out there. Maybe just maybe just open things up and see if anyone has any thoughts or any responses before we go much further. I am always loath to go on and on in the Sunday forum where people typically chomping at the bit to join in. Judy and Barbara.
I was really taken with this how the Cappadocians here are talking about private property and thinking about the impossibility of ownership, right? The land exists before you exist. It will exist after you exist. So how is it that you possibly can claim ownership over this thing, which is bigger than you, right?
Yep.
And of course, the whole way we enforce or create ownership, private ownership of property is through threat of force.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's the reason I can call this my property is because the police back me up, and if you try and use my property and I am not okay with my property and I'm not okay with that, I have force of law and force of violence to back me up in my claim. And so I think it really gets at the relationship, the inseparable relationship between the acquiring to oneself of property and things and violence.
Yeah.
That only happens. That notion only can exist if you have behind you, the force of violence,
Right,
the
right.
threat of it. Yeah.
And it drives home, we might say, that just how unharmonious a state of affairs that is, right? So
Yeah.
I'm hoarding things. I've got, folks with weapons to back me up. That's not a harmonious vision of society, of the world more broadly.
Yeah. And again, this is brilliant, how contrary to nature
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah.
Because of course, nature doesn't care who uses the apples that fall from the tree.
Thank you, Judy. Barbara.
Yeah, I was thinking, fast forwarding this theory thousands of years of, I think it was Elizabeth Warren's statement that, even if you produce these goods on your own, you pay for the land, you pay for the production, you still need roads that were created by somebody else. You still need communal resources to bring those goods to where, so it can't be just an independent venture. I own the land, therefore you at least in modern times, you need other people helping you do that. Another thing I thought of when I wondered about this is, what about the fact that people see goods, I guess, as a way to facilitate or incorporate beauty into their lives. You know, like, I want this thing because it's beautiful and the beauty enhances my relationship with the divine. Is that an argument?
It is an argument. It gets into really tricky terrain. Sorry, as some of you know, I do work in theological aesthetics, which explores aesthetic theory, theories of beauty, and how they connect with theological claims. And so these kinds of issues are kind of haunting, I think, theological aesthetics at every turn, really. A lot of directions to go. And one remark would be that just as with other avenues that might put us in touch with God, put us in relationship with God, there are dangers to navigate, right? And the beauty route might present us with a particularly large number of dangers, right? So ways in which that pursuit can be distorted despite best efforts or despite best intentions. So that there is certainly, I think you've made the point clearly, Barbara, you know, a tendency to hoard goods, hoard pretty goods, right? And one can tell oneself that it's doing good work in some grander sense, right? It's always a very difficult line to walk, but maybe one point to make would be that one can also discover beauty, pursue beauty, create beauty, be in encounter with beauty, without delving into, without veering into a kind of problematic consumption of goods. It certainly presents itself enticingly in that, I mean, when beauty is in play, but there's also beauty without that eventuality, without that, right? Tricky to navigate, though, for sure. Yeah, Craig.
I just wondered if anyone online had a comment or a question. Or to be short.
I was just really taken by this comment of community. I'm not quite sure who said it, but that communal aspect of stewardship is really central to a lot of this.
Absolutely.
That's kind of what I picked up there. I was just chewing on that a little bit.
Yeah. No, that's right, Kathy. There's a in play here, I think, at every turn is the idea that these goods will be distributed throughout the community, right? And that things will be okay if we distribute goods through the community, that there won't be a deprivation of the community members, right? Everyone will make it, which presumes, I think, a certain degree of interconnection among community members. I think honestly, that's in going through this material myself, I as you are perhaps as well, I'm aware of what an acute challenge it is, especially to a 21st century American mindset, right? One doesn't always encounter such difficulties, and it's based precisely around community, I think, and the challenges that we experience with the rugged individualism that's at our core in society. Aaron, your hand.
No,
Yeah, I'm gonna go to the bathroom and then I'll go.
and
All good. No, I wanted to respond to Barbara and say that that was certainly the challenge of Anglo-Catholic roots, right? Was like, how do we bring in, as a social good, the idea of a neighborhood that might not have beauty, to be able to restore their souls, right?
Yeah.
And in the end, I think the argument to your point made that it was only in co-creation of beauty together, going out into the neighborhood, that soul building was done. It was not a matter of inviting in, but the collaborative effort, which I think speaks to the overall thesis being done here, which is that if we own the good and invite people in, it's a very different thing than saying that we don't, and that we collectively will be in touch together.
Good, thank you. And there's a whole lot there. I think the interconnection in particular of the beautiful and the good, right? That it's in going out into the community, creating beauty there, that actually moral imaginations are formed, right? That these things, we tend to sometimes at least think of beauty as a kind of optional extra, something that's nice if you can get it, but we don't necessarily think of it as integral to the formation of our moral selves. But that is something that the Anglo-Catholics certainly had in view, and others as well. Yeah, Roger.
Along this line, I think if we look at the artist side of creation of beauty, then there were a lot of people with wealth that were patrons funding this creation of beauty. And whether it's, and there's an aspect of choosing to do that where we're actually supporting the creator of beauty. It's not so much, yes, we like it and it brings beauty into our lives, but it also is releasing that creation of beauty in the other.
Mhm.
And so that isn't to deny that there's a whole big monetary side now, but there is, when you look historically, that it enabled artists to share that beauty more widely or the community in many cases.
Right.
What I thought that really marked the colonial mindset is that there's a couple cultural examples. One is one of the Bible translators in the island in the beginning, and the language group he was in, soon discovered that among that group there was no sense of property, of owning. So if he used a hammer, he never knew where it was going to be next, because whoever needed that would pick it up and use it and leave it wherever they used it. And so it was kind of blew his mind that here is a group who doesn't have a sense of owning.
Right.
They're existing as a community, and all is shared.
Yeah.
And we can bring that home then with the Native American approach to land, in which you can't even use the word steward, because that sort of implies that it's yours to manage. But there's a mentality we have trouble wrapping our heads around, where they're just part of it and living in harmony with it. And in the West Coast tribes, the potlatch was a big event in common, where somebody who had gained goods would throw a massive party and give everything away. And so these kinds of things are just foreign, we don't consider it. But if you look in contrast, it just shows how affected we are by the colonial mindset.
Right. That impulse to grab.
And the vocabulary that we can't even talk about, how do we live in harmony with, rather than own and use.
I often think about the view of the human being that's at the heart of these different manifestations, right? And it seems to me that, if it is the case that there is no me without you,
Right.
Then I think you are more willing to entertain these possibilities of the knowledge, seizing for myself, because the one who forms me, the one who establishes me, the one who makes me could need these things too. It's not to reduce it to self-interest, but it is not ultimately in one's interest to hoard, because one cuts oneself off from the very source of life, which is inevitably, unavoidably beyond oneself. And this tilt, more than a tilt, toward the individual that we grow up in, I think here in the States, makes that really, really challenging. Judy, a hand
Yeah,
up there.
yeah, just one quick thing, and actually you've come right back to the thing that's really poking at me here, which is that this individual perspective, where I acquire things and I might share them, but they're really mine to decide about, versus letting all that go into a communal space. and everything then flourishes better. That letting go takes so much trust. Right? And so really it's a crisis of trust in the goodness and the abundance of God. Right? And the
Justice of your own community.
and the justice of your community. And so it's a crisis of trust in God. It's a crisis of trust. And so because we don't have that trust, we turn in on ourselves and feel like we have to, it's a protection, wealth becomes a protection. Of course, that's what you literally hear in the commercials, like you have to prepare for tomorrow, you got to save up enough, you got to have big enough barns because you don't know what's going to happen in the future. And the whole premise of that is that no one else is going to take care of you. And so I think there's really profound social and spiritual dynamics in this, in our in our souls behind these.
Yeah. And I think Basil is so skilled at drawing out not only what happens in our souls, but also the riches themselves, he says. So there's one, I couldn't justify putting yet another quotation on the handout, but there's one that actually evokes comments that Craig has made over the years here. He's likening riches to this flowing of water, as we heard with that river analogy a few moments ago. And he says, when riches are closed up like this, they become stagnant. Right? That water, if you will, becomes algae filled, right? It's no longer good. Right? What an incredible waste to have riches go bad doing nothing when they could be going into at another point he says you want storehouses, you have them in the bellies of the poor. Right?
Oh.
And it's a really, really powerful way to put it. Like, you want to put this stuff somewhere, there's an opportunity for you right in front of your face. All right, so I'm aware of time, and we've heard some from the this exhortation to become like the earth. So I'd like to now pivot to becoming, as Basil puts it at one point, an agent of God, and then as Gregory of Nazianzus and a predecessor to Gregory of Nazianzus, Athanasius, will say, becoming like God, that is to say, being deified. So a few remarks along those lines. So under the section that I titled, be an agent of God's goodness, correct the unequal distribution of goods. We have a couple of, I think, quite powerful sets of words from Basil here. So the first one there, he says, "O mortal, recognize your benefactors." So a similar kind of thing to what we heard previously, like, see, note who has brought all of these things before you. Consider yourself who you are, what resources have been entrusted to you, from whom you received them, and why you received more than others. You have been made a minister or agent of God's goodness, a steward of your fellow servants. So you, rich person, are in the position you are in so that you might minister God's goodness to others. You might be an agent of God's goodness. Similar lines, similar ideas in play in the next passage. Where then did you obtain your belongings? For what purpose did you receive them? Is God unjust when he distributes to us unequally the things that are necessary for life? Why then are you wealthy while another is poor? Why else? But so that you might receive the reward of benevolence and faithful stewardship, while the poor are honored for their patient endurance in their struggles. So we're seeing again gestures toward this natural order. We got a sense of that moments ago. But now the rich person emerges as a key intermediary, right? A potential dam in this flow, who, if that person can understand their place correctly, that person can act as an agent for God. And fascinatingly to me, make sure that God is not unjust. God could potentially be unjust because we have a state of affairs in which some have a great deal and some have nothing at all. Make sure that God is not unjust. It's on you, rich person, to keep God from being unjust by distributing these goods. it might, take us down a notch in terms of divine omnipotence. We might be worried on that score. But it's a fascinating position to put the wealthy individual in. Right? It's on you. You've been entrusted with this. Why? Ask yourself, why have you been given these things? And if you probe, Basil suggests, you will discover you are in the position you're in to release the dam, right? Don't interrupt that flow of the goods to those who are in need. This line of thinking has a trajectory into, among many other arenas, Catholic social teaching. And there, what one finds really quite fascinatingly, figures such as Pope John the 23rd, emphasizing the universal destination of the earth's goods. This is they are to be universally distributed, and that gets encapsulated in the Pope's words and gets continued in a number of other arenas. And with Gaudium et Spes, one of the documents that is produced at the Second Vatican Council, there's a link that's drawn between the right of all to the earth's goods, so things that we have heard, and the right of poor people to take from wealthy people what they need for survival. So we go yet further into really controversial terrain. But once again, this is at the heart of the church. This is a dogmatic constitution produced at the Second Vatican Council. One doesn't get a higher level of authority than that within the Catholic Church. So we've got some envelope pushing ideas concerning property that are getting advocated here. Aaron mentioned the Anglo-Catholic branch of the Episcopal Church. Within the Oxford movement, certainly figures such as John Henry Newman and others are retrieving these very patristic figures and discovering their insights that they think need to be heard in our day as well. So these ideas go a lot of different directions. What I'd like to do now, though, is demonstrate that what is upon us, what we are exhorted to do, is not simply to be like the earth, nor even to be simply an agent of God, but actually to be divine, as it is controversially put. We find in Gregory of Nazianzus ideas about deification, being made God, being deified, that get linked intimately with the sort of social justice dimension that we've just described, with an other directed dimension that we've described. So a couple of quick words on deification, and then we'll link it to what we've been up to. So this idea that we are to become like God, even become God, is a major feature of early Christian soteriologies, early Christian understandings of salvation. It gets encapsulated by Athanasius, among others, who puts forward something called the exchange formula. And that exchange formula for him goes like this. It says, God became human so that human beings might become divine. An exchange of states. Right? Now, once that is said, some of your orthometers are probably just running wild, right? So becoming divine, we're pushing the envelope on possibly the creator-creature distinction, a crucial line in Christian theology. So any number of further reflections from these figures themselves and later commentators will assure one that we are not, in fact, breaching that divide, but instead becoming God, becoming divine, is typically associated with kind of select divine attributes. So immortality in particular is often put forward, incorruptibility as well. That's what we mean, according to a number of figures, when we talk about becoming God. So that might soothe any worries that we're getting into questionable theological territory. With that said, the literature on deification, the reflection on this, often envisions, and it does a real disservice, I think, to the fullness of the idea, often envisions a kind of solo flight up into the divine, right? So being incorporated into God in a mystical manner that would, on many accounts, not have much of a role for others, for a Christian community in that process, not have much of a role for the world as a whole. Right? This is a direction in which things can go. So with that in view then, and I could talk more about that if anyone would like to do so, but with that in view, I think a quite interesting version of deification gets put forward by Gregory Nazianzus and before him by Athanasius, that very much has the other in view, very much has a vision of what we've just heard from Basil, but with the accompanying idea that when this happens, when we do the kinds of things that Basil is calling us to do, we are actually becoming divine. So some words from both Gregory Nazianzus and Athanasius will, I hope, drive this point home. So Gregory Nazianzus gives us the following. He says, "In nothing does a man's affinity with God lie so much as in his capacity to do good. Come to be a God to the unfortunate by imitating God's mercy." Again, pillar of orthodoxy, Gregory Nazianzus, calling upon us to become a God. How? By imitating God's mercy. So sure, we have divine attributes like immortality and corruptibility. Those might put forward an enticing vision of being deified. Another divine attribute concerns God's mercy. That is what Gregory Nazianzus wants to bring our attention to. That's the way in which we are like God, the way in which we are divine, to being merciful as God is merciful. Along similar lines, imitate God's philanthropy. It is in this, in doing good, that man is preeminently divine. You can become God without hardship. Do not forego the opportunity for deification. God's philanthropy is what we should imitate. That is what being deified means. Athanasius is a figure who precedes Gregory Nazianzus. He gives us that wonderful exchange formula mentioned moments ago. He also is a pillar of orthodoxy, instrumental surrounding the affirmation of the divinity of Jesus Christ, combats Arianism in various ways. He has maybe the richest quotation along these lines on the sheet here. God is pleased to call us poor mortals by the title of gods. It does not make us, as God, the source of happiness to the creatures. It is more in this way that we are disposed to distribute benefits and to give assistance freely, impartially, and universally, even as God himself does. For it is only in this manner that we can, in any sense, become imitators of God when we dispense to others and bestow liberally upon other people those good gifts which come to us from him. So we have been given this title of gods. What does that mean? Athanasius says it means to distribute benefits, very similarly to what we just heard from Basil. And I love this, to give assistance freely, impartially, universally, just a sense of magnanimous, lavishing upon those in need what it is that they would benefit from. That's what being God is like. It's not about becoming powerful. It's not about becoming immortal so much as it's about this kind of divine attribute taking into oneself and enacting in the world. So it's not just then when we do this kind of thing, it's not just that we're like the earth, which even the dirt, the inanimate soil is producing things, putting them before those who would benefit from them. We're not simply agents of God, not acting on God's behalf, as we also heard from Basil, but we actually become divine. This is what deification consists of. Integral aspect of soteriology, then, making sure that it's directed outward toward God. And we see here an intersection, I would suggest, between some traditional, robust theological claims that we find in the tradition and some very, what we could think of as forward-thinking, envelope-pushing ideas concerning property, possession of goods, and the distribution of them. That's all I have. If anyone has anything to put forward, yeah, Judy.
You know, I was really taken in a new way by your the quote from Athanasius that God becomes human, that human might become divine. And of course, the pivot point there is Christ, right? It's Jesus. And so, and then you immediately moved into a comment which about individual, that we tend to think of this as a sort of individual becoming like God. But of course, the way it's because that's through Christ, the whole thing happens through Christ. It isn't individual, right? Because we are members of Christ's body. It only happens by being incorporated into the most profound connection with other people that one could have, which is literally being parts of the same body. And of course, the Apostle Paul talks about this in 1 Corinthians. And they're having the same problems, which is inequality in the church. And he talks about, how can you think that you as one part of the body are benefiting when other parts of the body suffer? And so it's really, there's because Christ is the way in which God brings us into the divinization. There's no way that it can be individual. It's always got to be communal, because we are parts of the same body. And so I just thought that was that I've heard that quote before, but it just hit me in such a way that yeah, we do usually think of it as in a very individual sense, but because Christ is the mode through which that happens, we can't be disjointed from the other members. It's always got to be a communal organization.
Yeah, and the body image, I think, drives that point home with such force, right? The interdependence among all, right? That for a body to function, all members need to perform their functions, or else the whole thing will collapse, right? Yeah.
I guess in the same vein, like you were saying that it's about a lack of trust. You have to hoard things because you don't trust God, but it's also because you don't trust your community. And so trusting your community, but having a community that's trustworthy are these two necessary pieces of being able to be generous with your will. And I guess I never really understood the point of community before on quite that level. You get told that community is so important, and I'm like, well, I trust the people who tell me this, but it's like E equals MC squared. Like, I'm sure it's true, but that's why you need communities, because without it, if you're alone, you can't be generous because you need your money to protect you from disasters.
Right.
And in order to be able to give up your money, you have to be able to trust your community will do what the money was going to do for you. Yeah.
Right. And we can appreciate, I hope, just how far reaching a trustworthy community's actions can be, right? That it allows everyone to be who they are, that we're cut off from who we are. We don't have a community that we can trust. Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you.
At the risk of translating the sublime into the ridiculous, I do think this quotation from Elizabeth Warren, I do want to read it because I think there's something here that there's nobody in this country who got rich on their own. Nobody. You built a factory out there, good for you. But I want to be clear. You moved your goods to market on roads the rest of us paid for. You hired workers the rest of us paid to educate. You were safe in your factory because of police force and fire forces that the rest of us paid for. You didn't have to worry that marauding bands would come and seize everything at your factory. Now look, you built a factory and it turned into something terrific or a great idea. God bless. Keep a hunk of it. But part of the understanding of the social contract is you take a hunk of that and pay forward for the next kid who comes along, which I think is kind of what we're saying in that we didn't do it on our own.
Right.
Now, or
And this tendency, one might be tempted to call it a sinful tendency, right? To exaggerate our own role, to exaggerate what we have done and to downplay the importance of what others have done.
Well, thank you very much, Mark, and I'd like to thank everyone for their attendance, those online, those in the room, really enjoyed the discussion. And we look forward to concluding this series next week. If you're able to join us, Aaron Weber Johnson will be presenting. And hope to see as many as possible. And so if we could give Mark a round of thanks, please.
You all. Thank you.
And just like to remind you, if you're able to join us, church is in about 6 or 7 minutes. Hope to see everyone. So thank you very much, Mark, and thank you all.
Thank you.